honestly, I think this is one of those periods of our ecosystem where the ocean's not doing well. We are inextricably tied to the oceans and to the health of the oceans. We came from the oceans, and if we don't go back and husband the oceans, there won't be anything left for future generations. So someone has to kind of step up and try, or many people have to step up and try. With sea urchins in particular, as you may or may not know, on the Oregon coast, Southern Oregon has an overpopulation of purple sea urchin that are essentially decimating the kelp forests. And with the disappearance of those kelp forests, you have a lot of nurseries vital to some of the commercial species that actually grow and are harvested in Oregon and the Southern coast being threatened as well. So a lot of it has to do with kelp forest restoration. This is a business that I would say kind of hits three things. It builds sustainable jobs. It helps build the economy and restructure it towards climate resilience. And at some point it may be a really good business because sea urchin is in very high demand across the world. And so if we can find a commercial pathway to help the environment, I think it's hopefully like a win-win. I mean, the hardest part is really on a day-to-day basis, there is n number of things that could go wrong. Some of it has to do with weather variability. We have to actually go out and dive into the reef for them. If the swells are too high, you can't dive. When you pull the urchins out of the water, they're very delicate creatures, surprise, surprise. So you have to somehow keep them alive so they're fresh. Once they get fresh and you have to crack them, you have to also make sure that they get basically from the reef to someone's mouth in less than a week. And so there are a lot of difficulties with the business, but all in all, if you can link all the challenging pieces together in some way, then therein I think lies one of the outcomes and the benefits of the business is that philosophically, I think doing something that's too easy is never something that my mentors told me. And I think if you have the capacity, you should always focus on what you think might be the hardest problem to solve with some of the biggest benefits. Blue economy is anything that has to do with our oceans, possibly even our rivers and our aquatic ecosystems, and trying to build sustainable jobs around that new ecosystem, while trying to also re-architect the ocean and the the aquaculture economy towards something that is sustainable, which means you're not over harvesting. You're trying to rebuild or husband the ecosystem that's been damaged, and you're trying to find pathways where you can train a new successive generation on things that will basically create careers for them that will possibly not do as much harm to the environment as we've done in the past to the oceans. Well, we fit squarely within this niche called aquaculture. Further to that, we are actually even further niche. We are actually a land-based vertical aquaculture system that aims to essentially farm multiple species that are symbiotic to each other that you would normally find inside of a reef ecosystem. For example, in the reef, usually urchins eat kelp, sea cucumbers feed on urchin waste, and that waste gets remediated back to the kelp. And so what we're really trying to do is mimic as much of the natural ecosystem as possible to find as many commercial pathways for our products as possible. And that's a relatively novel approach. It's only novel in the fact that we're trying to mimic what nature has done, but it is very natural when you think about how you would approach something in the blue economy, which is to basically mimic nature as much as possible in order to find a pathway for commercial scale. And that's essentially what we're doing. I think it's one thing to, kind of appreciate the ocean. I think it's another thing to want to feel more connected to it. Especially when you're living in a beautiful town on the Oregon coast, or you're up here in the Pacific Northwest. We are inextricably tied to the oceans just as much as we are tied to the land. but you can't see the kelp forest like you can see the forests in Oregon. And when the forests in Oregon burn down like they have the last few years, everyone feels the impact of that. When 90% of the kelp forest disappears in Oregon over the course of a decade, only a very few people see that. But I think more and more people should be aware that those forests are just as important as our terrestrial forests. And I think just making sure that we focus and bring awareness to it is really important in terms of just broadening our appreciation of everything that's sort of tied together in our environment. So, well, I would say just get started. Don't think about it as a business. Start just carving out like a small niche and just learn from there. The way that I sort of approach anything is I kind of take it as a project at first, and then I kind of try to sort of figure out what all the factors are in terms of the project itself before it becomes a business. Because I do think in the blue economy, there are a lot of frameworks that don't exist at all. There are some organizations that are trying to help folks through that framework, but they are also in and of themselves developing their own framework. So there's not a playbook, and I think if you try to take too much of an academic approach to the blue economy, you could get stuck before you even get started. And so my suggestion is even just to start volunteering, to basically go out on the water, to go to conferences and actually talk to some of the folks that are actually in these industries. But honestly, my suggestion really is to just get started and expose yourself to as many people, because you're going to formulate a better thesis once you actually get direct exposure by just communicating and building your own thesis and your own framework based off of both what you see out there, who you interact with, and what your intrinsic motivators are for basically being involved in the blue economy.